You held her trembling hand the night she cried about her father. And something in you believed this was love, that her tears were an invitation, and your stillness was a virtue. But she wasn't looking for stillness. She was measuring the weight of your silence. She cried, and you thought she needed comfort, but she was only testing the temperature of your soul. You brought flowers, you wrote poems, you offered softness like a lamb at the altar, unaware that altars demand sacrifice, not sympathy. Then came the moment she looked through you, not at you, like a window that failed to reflect. And you felt it, that subtle, eternal wound, not rejection, but disinterest, not betrayal, but boredom. She wanted to believe in something unshakable. You gave her something understandable. Now, her heart beats next to someone who doesn't listen but decides, not someone who absorbs her storm but dares to name it. You mistake vulnerability for virtue, but what she craves is burden, not balm. If this whisper already knows, you let it echo. Like the video, leave your shadow in the comments, subscribe, and stay near the silence. A man who explains his feelings becomes a boy again. In her eyes she came to follow a mystery, not babysit a confession. You told her everything, the ache behind your father's silence, the reasons you flinch when someone raises their voice, the guilt you carry like a locket you never open. And in that moment, as you unraveled like paper in the rain, you thought she'd love you more for it. You thought being known would make you worthy. But the moment she saw all of you, something in her eyes dimmed, not with cruelty, with disappointment, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that leaves. You became too audible, too readable, too solved. You thought your honesty was a fortress, but it only made you smaller. Each word peeled away your gravity, your mystery, your edge, until you became a boy sitting cross-legged at her feet, hoping she'd say it was okay. She didn't come for a boy. She came for the silence that holds fire beneath it. You called it emotional depth, but she felt it as weightlessness. And now you're haunted not by the loss of her presence, but by how quickly her need evaporated when you gave her your truth in full daylight. She didn't leave because you cried. She left because you explained. The lamb always dies in the retelling. You forgot that every woman holds a priestess inside her, and the priestess does not worship what is revealed too early. The altar demands blood, yes, but not the kind that spills without resistance. Your vulnerability was not a sacrifice, it was a shortcut, and she saw that. You thought your suffering would earn you love, but love is not a reward, it is a response. She would have forgiven your darkness. She could have even entered it. But when you made it into a story, a soft tale of childhood bruises and careful disclaimers, you lost the dignity of pain. You became an artifact, not a man. Do you remember how she leaned in when you spoke less? How her eyes watched you like a forest listens to wind? That was not confusion. That was reverence. And when you began to name every shadow, to trace every thought, to clarify every flicker, you severed the veil. You turned revelation into routine, mystery into manual, and her wonder died in daylight. She doesn't want your feelings. She wants your axis. Something in you that does not move when she moves. Something she cannot explain to her friends. Something that both scares and centers her. You think love is built on understanding, but understanding is not desire. She did not long for you because she understood you. She longed for you because she didn't. And in trying to make yourself known, you became forgettable. She came to follow you, not mother you, but you wanted to be safe, gentle, kind. You wanted her to feel secure. And in doing so, you collapsed the distance that held her gaze. You became accessible, then replaceable. You say women want emotional availability, but what they want deeply, unconsciously, is containment. Not the flood, but the dam. Not the words, but the wordless certainty behind your eyes. The feeling that you've walked through hell and didn't come back begging to talk about it. There is a kind of man who bleeds in private, not because he is afraid, but because his pain is too holy to be handled carelessly. She senses this, and it pulls her like gravity, but you bled in the open. You held out your wounds like proof of worthiness, and she recoiled not because she lacked compassion, but because she could no longer lean on what was now limp. The sacred became sentimental. She wants a storm that does not need her to fix it, and still, you tell yourself it was her fault, that she couldn't handle your depth, that she was emotionally immature, that you were too much. No, you were too soon, too eager, too explained. You didn't leave any part of yourself uncaptured. No secret chamber, no unspoken weight. And that's what she needed. Not control over you, but awe. You confused exposure with intimacy. There are things in a man that should remain unnamed, not because they are shameful, but because they are tectonic. She wants to feel them under her feet, not hear them described like a tour guide reciting trauma. And here is the most painful truth: she did love you, before she met all of you. When she first looked at you, she imagined strength, silence, maybe even danger. And in those fantasies, she softened. She pictured herself kneeling at the altar of your unknowability. She longed to be near a man who didn't need to be understood, because in that distance, that elegant, painful distance, her desire was safe. She could surrender, she could reach. But then you handed her the full map, and a woman with a map does not linger. She wants to guess, to doubt, to ache for clarity. She wants her heart to pound when you don't respond right away, not because you're playing games, but because your mind is elsewhere, on something real, on something that governs you. You wanted her heart by giving her your tears, but her heart was built to follow blood, not explanations. And now you sit there, wondering why you did everything right and still lost her, why she ran towards someone colder, ruder, simpler. It's not because you were kind, it's because you stopped being wild. You stopped being untouched by her approval. And in that moment, she became your keeper, not your lover. You will try again, with someone new, and you will be tempted to do it differently, to talk less, to reveal slowly. But if it's an act, she will feel it. Because women do not read words, they read the soul's posture. Do you stand or do you seek? You spoke too soon. Not with your mouth, but with your essence. You became accessible before you became admirable. You gave your soul before she earned the right to carry its silence, and so she dropped it. Not out of malice, out of instinct. The same way you stop listening to a song that tells you everything in the first verse. Some men are oceans, others are aquariums. You made yourself easy to love, but she never wanted easy. She wanted inevitable. And now, in the ruins of what you call heartbreak, you wonder if you should become colder, crueler, more dominant. But that is still performance, still a reaction to her gaze, still orbiting her. No, you must become indifferent to her perception. Not cruel, not aloof, just irreducible. You must carry a silence that doesn't need translation, a pain that does not need applause, a soul that stands even when she vanishes. She doesn't need a man who cries. She needs a man who can cry but doesn't, because his grief is not for display. His softness is not a strategy. His sorrow is not seeking sympathy. It's carved into the bones of his silence, and she will feel it, not hear it. The lamb who speaks too soon dies alone. The lion who watches without explaining is followed forever. Now ask yourself, were you ever strong or just available? And if this still burns, leave your ash in the comments. Like the silence if it stirred something buried. Subscribe not for answers, but to stay near the ache. She tests your sensitivity not to find a saint, but to expose a hollow to see if your soul can bleed without whining. She asked if you loved her, and you answered too quickly. She whispered of fear, and you rushed to reassure. She pushed, and you bent. She cried, and you wrapped your softness around her like a woolen shroud. But she didn't come to be smothered. She came to be seen, and not in your words, but in the way your silence held the ground, even when her storm came crashing. You thought being gentle would save her, that your careful tone and open heart would soothe her doubts. But gentleness, without weight, becomes foam, and foam cannot hold a drowning soul. She threw herself at you not to be caught, but to see if you would stand. You knelt instead. You didn't notice the trial. It came wrapped in intimacy, in subtle moments, a glance, a delay, a harsh word spoken not to hurt you, but to provoke something behind your smile, something real, something immovable, something wild. But each time you gave her more petals, more softness, more kindness, and so she wept not for your cruelty, but for your absence. She didn't want a guardian. She wanted a gate. Your gentleness was not the crown she hoped for. It was a thornless wreath, beautiful, empty. She wanted to touch a man and feel the risk of bleeding. Because love, real love, is not safety. It is awe. And awe requires contrast, gravity, resistance. She needed to know you could hurt her, not that you would, but that you could. That there was fire behind the veil, that her soul was near something dangerous, something that chose to be gentle instead of needing to be. But you weren't choosing gentleness. You were dependent on it. You were using it as armor, as permission, as a way to be loved without risk. She felt it, that deep, unspoken contract. If I'm nice enough, soft enough, caring enough, you won't leave me. And in that moment, she became the stronger one. She wasn't testing your morality. She was testing your masculinity, not the version sold in loud voices and clenched fists, but the kind that holds tension like a flame inside a lantern, contained, but undeniable. You let her cry into your chest. You whispered all the right things, and still, she felt more alone than ever, because you offered comfort without authority, warmth without spine. You gave her shelter but not structure. And then came the moment she broke something precious, maybe a mood, maybe your pride, maybe your day, and you didn't even flinch. You smiled, you forgave, you swallowed the sting like medicine, and something in her broke. She didn't want a man who never resisted. She wanted a man who could say no and mean it, who could walk away if he had to, who didn't need her as proof of his goodness. She wanted to feel your boundary, not your surrender. But you were addicted to approval, so you bled out empathy until you became pale. You said yes when you meant no. You stayed up late to hear her fears, even when yours were gnawing through your ribs. You thought this made you noble, but it made you forgettable. Because a man who gives all his energy away loses the right to be called sovereign. Your gentleness was a throne you gave away before she even asked. And what she saw in you slowly, painfully, was not a saint, not a warrior, not even a lover. She saw a vacancy dressed in affection, a man who could soothe but not hold, who could care but not command. You were emotional, you were generous, you were available, but you were not anchored, and so she tested again. Sharper this time, a sarcastic jab, a long silence, a dismissive glance. Not because she wanted to hurt you, but because she was begging for something solid, something that didn't melt under pressure. You melted, and she knew, in that terrible moment of clarity, that you were not made of stone but of wax. You wore your gentleness like a crown, but a crown is only noble when it rests on something unshakable. Otherwise, it's just decoration. She doesn't hate you, she mourns you. She mourns the man you could have been if your compassion was carved from conviction, not dependency. If your kindness came from strength, not fear. She mourns the loss of polarity, the gravitational pull that happens when a man knows himself so deeply that he does not shrink in the presence of feminine chaos. He stills it, not with control, but with the depth of his stillness. You tried to mirror her emotions, but she didn't want a mirror. She wanted a mountain. She wanted to fall apart in the arms of something that wouldn't. And here's the bitter medicine: you did nothing wrong. But what is right often lacks soul, and soul does not beg for correctness. It begs for fire. You were too good, too giving, too peaceful, and in that perfection, she withered. Not because she needed drama, but because she needed to believe in your edge. Now you sit alone, wondering how kindness became weakness, how sensitivity became repulsion, how your goodness became your undoing. But ask yourself, was it really goodness, or was it submission in disguise? You feared her anger, you feared losing her, you feared being misunderstood, and so you crafted a version of yourself that would never be rejected. But what is never rejected is never desired. She wanted the truth of you, not the pleasing version, not the filtered one. She wanted to see if your soul had texture, if it had scars, if it had a shape that wouldn't change just to keep her warm. And now, months later, she finds herself drawn to someone colder, someone with silence behind his eyes, someone who doesn't try to understand her every emotion. And it hurts you. It feels like betrayal. But it's not. It's biology, it's myth, it's gravity. She doesn't want gentleness alone. She wants gentleness from strength. The tenderness of a lion is sacred. The tenderness of a lamb is sacrificial. You are offering yourself up, hoping to be chosen. But the man she craves is already chosen by himself, by his purpose, by something deeper than her affection. And until you become that, you will keep wearing crowns made of thorns, wondering why they pierce and never protect. So burn the script that told you kindness is enough. Let your fire return. Let your soul take shape again, not to dominate, but to be undeniable. She doesn't want your empathy. She wants to feel your soul beneath it. And if this whisper found you too late, let it live anyway. Like the video. Leave your thorn in the comments. Subscribe to walk the narrow edge with us. She doesn't want your protection. She wants the shadow of your strength resting on her chaos like a silent, sacred weight. She kneels in the garden, not yours, not anyone's. Her own inner wilderness, where roots tangle like questions and petals bruise themselves open just to feel. She is chaos wrapped in beauty. And you thought your role was to guard her, but she did not come to be guarded. She came to find the sword buried beneath your calm. You, with your softness, your kindness, your listening ear, you stood at the edge of her wildness like a well-meaning gardener. You trimmed her thorns, you praised her bloom, you promised to keep her safe, and she smiled. But she didn't open. Because what she needed, what she hoped for, was not safety. It was danger. Contained. She wanted to feel the edge of your restraint, not hear about your boundaries, not read affirmations. She wanted to brush against something dangerous that didn't move because it chose not to. A sword buried, not broken. You thought your job was to tame her. She wanted to be met. You misread her silence. You thought it meant she needed more reassurance, more words, more emotional closeness. But her silence was sacred, a doorway. She was waiting for your presence to deepen, not your explanations, for you to enter, not hover. But you hovered, circling her inner fire like a man afraid to get burned, offering petals where she needed pressure, asking questions where she needed stillness. You touched everything except the thing she most wanted you to claim, not with your hands, but with your soul. And so she leaned back, just slightly, and watched you fold. You didn't notice the test because it was too quiet. A slow closing of the petals, a shift in her gaze, a tenderness, now laced with doubt. She didn't want to doubt you, but she was looking for the shape of something larger than her feelings, something unyielding, something with the gravity of conviction. She didn't want your shield. She wanted to feel your shadow cast long across her, not to be dominated, but to be oriented. She wanted to walk into her own confusion and know that your presence still stood, unmoved, like a landmark in the mist. But you mistook her storm for a call to rescue. You came rushing in with answers, plans, and soft words, and in your rush to save, you vanished as a source of strength. Because strength is not what rushes, it is what waits. She didn't need you to protect her from pain. She needed you to hold the weight of it with her, not collapse beneath it, not run from it, and not solve it. You feared being too much. You feared being controlling. You feared becoming the kind of man women run from. But she didn't want you to become him. She wanted you to become you, the version of you that can bear the full weight of life without trembling. She wanted to hand you her fury, her fear, her aching confusion and feel it land, not get absorbed, not deflected, not intellectualized. She wanted to know you could carry it, and you couldn't. Not because you were weak, but because you were always trying to be agreeable. But agreeable men bend, and bent things cannot hold chaos. There is a sword buried inside you, beneath the shame, beneath the performance, beneath the years of being told that women want sensitivity above all. It waits, covered in roots, rusted, maybe forgotten, but it is still there, and she feels it, even now, especially now. She tests not to destroy you, but to awaken that sword, because a woman does not crave your compliance. She craves the echo of a man who is not afraid of his own gravity. She wants to lean against you like a cathedral, to pour her storm into your silence, and hear nothing but the sound of your breath. That is what steadies her. That is what makes her trust. You thought trust was built with words. No. Trust is built when she throws herself at you emotionally and you do not move. Not because you are cold, but because you are centered. You think she left because you weren't enough. The truth is colder. You were too available, too soft, too ready to be shaped by her moods. And so, she no longer saw her own storm reflected in your calm, only her confusion mirrored in your absence of form. She wants a man who disturbs her rhythm, not to cause pain, but to snap her back into reverence. Because when she stands in front of a man who is already rooted, not for her, but for himself, she can finally exhale. Not because she's being pleased, but because she's finally being held without being possessed. She wants to feel small, not as a diminishment, but as a surrender, a chosen melting. But how can she melt if you're already liquid? She needs to crash against something real, something masculine, not in gesture, but in soul. You thought your value came from being harmless, but no woman worships a man who has no fire. She might thank you, she might appreciate you, but she will never choose you with the part of her that aches to kneel. You buried the sword so deep, you forgot how to stand with it, but it is still in you, and until you unearth it, you will mistake her testing for cruelty, her distance for coldness, her silence for rejection. It is none of those things. It is a final, sacred plea. to show her something true, not performance, not sweetness, not strategy, but the weight of a man who has met his own edge and stopped apologizing for it. You still have time, not to win her back, but to win yourself back. Dig into the garden of your quiet. Find the rusted blade. Touch it with the hands that have forgotten steel. Let your body remember the man who does not flinch at his own shadow. And then one day a woman will stand before you. She will weep, not from sadness, but from recognition, because in your stillness, she will finally find her own center. Not because you promised to protect her, but because your very presence is the sword resting across her chest, heavy, sacred, unmoving. And if this whisper has pierced you, if it rang somewhere in your ribs like a truth long buried, let it live. Like the video. Leave your sword in the comments. Subscribe and stay near the garden's edge. She stood in the rain and pressed her forehead to your chest. You didn't speak, you didn't move, you just stood and the storm obeyed. She wept, and for once, it was not to be heard. It was to be felt by something that would not shatter. Somewhere, a sword rusts in your soul. Will you dig for it, or will you keep offering flowers to women who came for fire?